And we just threw it all out on the,
Oh, are you serious?
on the curve, yeah. I think it might still be lying there.
We may need more after that. We're sort of relaying some of that still. Okay, we are live on our recording. Welcome all. Feel free to ask a question. Okay. Okay, 17b1. We're good. We'll get everybody back into the subject now. Okay, so let's just understand the premise where we're coming from without trying to go into the details of the whole Gemora right now. We used the method of Kal V'chomer last time we learned the weak versus the strict, and we said, remember we spoke about the boundaries of Yerushalayim and the certain holy fruits and foods that had to be eaten within the confines of the walls of Yerushalayim. Which is, again, what I reminded you last time, is when you walk through Jaffa Gate and you walk through the old city, there's a sacred ground that we step on, because these were halachically defined as the walls of Yerushalayim. And we're trying to understand, what is the source? What is the origin? How do we know that these sacrifices must be eaten within the walls of Yerushalayim? And we said, we're talking about Bikurim. Bikurim is the first fruits that we're discussing in this discussion, Bikurim. And we said that Bikurim can be learnt out of the tithe. In other words, you don't need a special verse for Bikurim. Hello, Evan, how's it? Hello, Hilton. Hello, Peter. You don't need... Come guys, here we go. Right, so for those who are going to watch this recording, we're on 17b1, bottom paragraph in the left-hand column. How's it, guys? Welcome. Wherever you're comfortable. So we said that the Bikurim, first fruits of the produce that are taken to Yerushalayim, they don't need a special apostle for this, because we can learn it out directly from Meiser. If you look at the tithe, the laws of tithe, right? You take the tithe to Yerushalayim, 17b1, yeah. You take the tithe to Yerushalayim, and you eat the tithe in the walls of Yerushalayim. And we said that just like it applies to the tithe, how much more so it should apply to the first fruits. And therefore, you don't need a verse specifically for it, because logic will tell you so. And for this logic, we use a logic of Kal V'chomer, weak and strict. If the weaker one, i.e. Meiser, has to be eaten in Yerushalayim, how much more so the stricter one, Bikurim, the first fruits, also must be eaten in the walls of Yerushalayim. So now the Gemara, we held off for this question, and now it's coming back to the question: who said that Meiser is more? Who said that first fruits, the Bikurim, is more strict than the Meiser than the tithe? Where did you get that logic from? Who established that Meiser is weak and Bikurim is strict? Where's that logic from? Are you comparing? I gave you the analogy last time we learned. If a 4-year-old has to hold a hand, that's the weaker one, obvious. Sorry, other way around. If the 6-year-old has to hold the hand and you cross the street, how much more so the 4-year-old has to cross the hand when you cross the street? Because the 4-year-old is more strict, younger. So here too, if the first fruits of Meiser have to be eaten in the walls of Yerushalayim, the tithe, how much more so the Bikurim, the first fruits, must be eaten in Yerushalayim? But who said a Bikurim is more strict than the tithe and the Meiser itself? And that's what we're after right now. Bottom of the left-hand column, last paragraph. My chumra de bikurim min meiser. What is the stringency? What is the strictness of the bikurim over the first fruits? So he says, shekein asurim lazarim. It's because the first fruits cannot be eaten by the lay person. That makes bikurim more strict, because bikurim have to be eaten only by the kohanim. Whereas Meiser Sheni, the tithe of called Meiser Sheni, which is eaten in Jerusalem, can be eaten by the owner. Let's just explain what that means. Often the tithe that we give is a tithe to other people. So the tithe to the Levites, called Meiser Levim or Levi, or Meiser Ani, the tithe to the poor man, right? Those didn't have to be eaten in Yerushalayim. Those you gave to the Levites, you gave to the poor man, and you were then exempt and able to eat the rest of your produce. The Meiser Sheni, it's called the second tithe, was eaten in Yerushalayim by the owner. So in this regard, the Bikurim, the first fruits, are more strict, because Bikurim have to be eaten specifically by the Kohanim, whereas Meiser can be eaten by anyone. Okay. Says the Gemora, Adarabba. I'm going to respond and say, no, Ma'aser Chamor. I'm going to answer you. I think that the tithe is more strict than the first fruits. You gave me one reason why the first fruits, the Bikurim, are more strict. I'm going to give you a reason why the Ma'aser is more strict, why the tithe is more strict. Shekain Asur Le'oinein. A Ma'aser is forbidden to the Oinein. What is an Oinein? A person, this is a practical category of person, a person whose relative passed away and the relative has not yet been buried. So that limbo status is called an oinein. You're not yet an oval, because an oval only starts once you're buried. And then Shiva begins, then becomes Avelus. But until the oval starts his Avelus, you can have something called oinein, okay, which is a very, very hard status to be in, especially when you're in the Shabbos or in a Yom Tov and things are being delayed and sorry, you had that.
Well, David, you read Shabbos. You read Rosh Hashanah.
So you had 2 days to wait.
Yeah. From the Sunday right until the Wednesday.
14th, yeah, it's also 2 days to wait.
Shabbat Agadol as well.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
It's terrible. You know, there's a difference in minhag. The big question is whether you say Kaddish or not. Whether an oinen says Kaddish or not. If I'm not mistaken, Ashkenaz doesn't. You come to shul because it's Yom Tov, but you don't say anything.
I think we said about brachot. Onan isn't obligated to say brachot, and I think he told us the story of someone that was so used to it and actually pained them not to do it.
To be able to do it, yeah. And tefillin, you don't do tefillin in those days. In both your scenarios, it's Yom Tov anyway. So there's no tefillin. In Chabad, they start saying Kaddish from the moment of the passing, even if the funeral hasn't taken place yet. So they'll start Kaddish immediately, which makes it a little bit easier, especially in a case like yours. You're waiting 2 days. What are you going to do those 2 days? You know, you're not an oval, you're an oinen, somewhere in limbo in between. So here comes the case. Ma'aser cannot be eaten by the oinen, whereas the bikurim can be. Look at, and he says that's according to Reb Shimon. Look at footnote number 6. It's actually a matter of dispute whether an oinen may eat bikurim, but Reb Shimon himself permits it, as it states in Yevomus. Since Ma'aser Sheni is in this sense more stringent than bikurim, we cannot automatically extend to Bikurim the prohibition against eating outside Jerusalem that is stated regarding Ma'aser Sheni. You can't automatically connect it because now it's not Kal V'chomer, it's not weak and strict, because now the Bikurim is more strict because the Oinin can't eat it. Thus, the mention of Bikurim is necessary in its own context. The verse's explicit prohibition against eating outside Jerusalem and is not available for the additional prohibition against eating it before its procedure is completed. Okay, let's leave that detail for a moment. But what we're doing here is we're counteracting, we're counter-arguing what we established last week. We established last week that Bikurim can easily learn it out of Bikurim. Again, let's get familiar with the terminology. Bikurim, the first fruits, can learn it out from Ma'aser, from the tithe, because the tithe is weak. You can't eat it in Jerusalem. How much more so the Bikurim is strict. You can't eat it in Jerusalem. Now we're asking, we're saying, hold on. Bikurim is not more strict than Ma'aser. Ma'aser, tithe, is more strict than Bikurim. Because Ma'aser, the Oinen, intermediary status, can't eat the tithe, but he can eat the Bikurim, according to one opinion. And therefore, what comes out of here is that according to that, if you switch around the stringency and you establish that Ma'aser tithe is in fact more strict than the first fruits, you can't learn one from the other. And that explains our question of last week. Why do we need a specific verse for Bikurim, for the first fruits? The answer is because you can't learn it out of Ma'aser, because it's more strict. If it's more strict, that explains why you can't eat it in Jerusalem. But Bikurim, which is more lenient, and the Oinen can eat of Bikurim, maybe then you can eat it in Yerushalayim. That's why you need a specific verse to say, no, even Bikurim, which may be more lenient, also can't be eaten in the walls of Yerushalayim. Okay. Let's go to the next case. This is now at the top of the right-hand column. So we established this theory of kal v'chomer, light and weak, continues into the next comparison. We use the comparison of, again, now we're talking about the Meiser, and we said that the Meiser, the Toida and the Shlomim, which were Thanksgiving offerings, right, to thank Hashem. So the Thanksgiving offerings can also be learnt out of tithe because they're more strict than the tithe.
The previous paragraph was disputing
Yes.
the Kabul Chomer.
Yes.
Okay.
And therefore the whole piece of Gemora of last week falls away. Remember, we had a whole dilemma. What will you use the verse of the Bikurim for?
Yeah.
We spoke about timing. Wait until the blood's been sprinkled. Right? That's no longer necessary. The reason why you need the verse of Bikurim is to tell you that you have to eat it in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem. So we're arguing against that which we established last week. Exactly. Okay, come to the next one. We established last week as well that the Torah and the Shlomim, the Thanksgiving offerings, are more strict than the Meiser. Also, same thing. And therefore we did the Kal V'chomer. Just like Meiser, you wait for the blood to be sprinkled. How much more so, the more strict case of the Todah offering, you also have to wait for the blood to be sprinkled on the altar. Yeah? So now the question is, why is it more strict? Why is the Todah and the Shlomim, which are Thanksgiving offerings, why are they more strict than the Meiser offering is? This is Shekain Tu'unim Matan Domim. The Todah and the Shlomim, these Thanksgiving offerings, they have blood, the emurim, and parts, legabe mizbeach, which are on the altar. You burn specific parts on the altar, on the mizbeach, which means you can't benefit from all of it. That's making it more strict. The Meiser, the tithe of Meiser Sheni, you can eat the whole thing yourself. Bring the produce to Yerushalayim and eat your produce. You're fine. But the Todah and the Shlomim offering is often burnt, parts of it, blood and limbs. That makes it more strict.
Is it a fair comparison because the Todah is
an animal,
cattle, whereas the Maaseh is crops?
Yeah, crop. Yeah.
Vegetables or wheat or fruits that you have to eat in Jerusalem. I don't know.
It's a good question you ask, Mitzvah. But I think the point is the same. Look, you're right that you never offer up fruit on the Mizbeach, but you did offer up flour, birds. In other words, if God wanted to, he would instruct us to offer up fruit too. He didn't. So the fact that that's the category is because God decided that fruits won't be on the Mizbeach. And the fact that God decided that fruits won't be on the Mizbeach makes it more lenient than the Todah offering of the Thanksgiving, which is partially sacrificed on the Mizbeach.
But you could eat the whole fruit versus you can't eat the whole animal.
Exactly. It's sort of irrelevant what the actual food is. It's the fact that God decided that the fruit you'll eat entirely and the animals you won't eat entirely. And that makes the Todah offering more strict because you don't get the whole thing. You've got to offer up the blood and the limbs and the Mizbeach and the altar. Okay, but then we respond and we say, hold on, that's not so true. Adarab, on the contrary. Meiser Chamor. In fact, the Meiser, the tithe, that's going to be more stringent. Shekain Tu'unin Kesef Tzura. There's a rule about the tithe. You have to redeem it if you choose to redeem it. What do you mean redeeming Meiser? Let's say you're an orange farmer and you've got loads and loads of oranges. There's no way you're going to be able to schlep your Meiser, your tithe of oranges from wherever it was, right? South of Israel to Yerushalayim, or north of Israel to Yerushalayim. So how are you going to do it? What you do is you redeem it. You sell it for money. You take that money and you bring it to Yerushalayim and you purchase food in Yerushalayim. And you benefit all the sellers of Yerushalayim with your money. And you buy food in Yerushalayim and you eat the food in Yerushalayim. That's the idea. That's called redemption. But specifically, Meiser has that redemption aspect of minted coins. Specifically, we'll learn the footnote now. specifically minted coins, whereas animals didn't have that rule. The Todah and the Shlomim offerings didn't have the rule of minted coins, which means they're more lenient. The Meister had specifications of how to redeem it, had to have a minted coin. But the animal of the Todah and Shlomim didn't, which shows you it's weaker. And if it's weaker, you can't compare one to the other again.
I mean, what did you do with the animals? Also to ship all the animals there?
No, you could redeem, but you don't have to use
Minted coins.
minted coins. Look at footnote number 18.
8.
Sorry, 8. Although redemption of sacred articles can generally be accomplished by substituting any item of value for them, so anything you can change it, exchange it for. The redemption of Ma'aser Sheni requires specifically its replacement with minted coins. This is alluded to in the Torah statement regarding the redemption of Ma'aser Sheni. It says, "V'tzarto hakesef," which literally means that you shall bind up the redemption money. But which can also be rendered as, and you shall engrave the silver, v'tzarto hakesef, i.e., the redemption should be performed with minted coins which bear an image. That's where the tzura means an image. It should have a tzura in the coin. By the way, I don't think there's any logic to this, unless it makes it more choshev, maybe. Maybe the coin in those days, which had an engraving in it, made it more important. So don't just bring me soil or metal, you can see I've been building, or bricks. That's cheap. I want to have a coin with an engraving inside of it.
It's just a piece of gold.
Yes, which
It's actual.
and it's got a specific value to it. It's used as a currency. That's the one you should bring out. The redemption of the Todah or the Shlomim offerings, which is possible if they develop a blemish that disqualifies them for sacrifice. Okay, that will be the case. Daryl was saying, how would you schlep them? But maybe the thinking is that the animals would walk. It wouldn't take you one day. It would take you a few weeks to get there. But animals ideally would walk. The problem is if they have a blemish and they can't be offered as sacrifices, then you exchange it. So it seems like you wouldn't necessarily exchange it if it could walk. That's the assumption.
You say that if you can redeem it, it's more strict.
If you need to redeem it with engraved coins, then it's more strict.
Even with the coins, but if you have the ability to redeem, why is that more strict? Maybe that should be more lenient.
Because it's the easier way.
No. Let's just clarify here. We're not saying that redeeming it or not redeeming it is the stringency or not the stringency. We're saying that the fact that you have to use a specific coin makes the redemption more stringent. It's not if you can redeem or can't redeem. They can both be redeemed in certain scenarios. They can both be redeemed. The question is, what are you using to redeem it? So the fact that the Meiser has this extra rule about using engraved coins, which shows some sort of currency level, makes that more strict. Then the Todah and the Shlomim, they can be used. We're going to see now what you can use with Todah and Shlomim.
I would think that maybe the further away you are, the more likely you are to
redeem, sure.
Because your animal could get a blemish on the way. So you're coming from the north.
Yeah. The distance. Okay, so it could be. Here it seems to imply that the only time you can redeem the animal if it has a blemish. You're asking, and Daryl's pointing out as well, what happens if the distance is too far? It could be. I'm not sure what. If the distance is too far, but the animal is kosher, must you bring that specific animal, or can you redeem it and buy new animals in Yerushalayim? For some reason, the way I'm reading it, it seems to indicate that you should ideally use the same animal. If you can't use the same animal because there's a mum or a blemish, and therefore you can't offer it up, then you replace it.
But you don't know that it's not kosher once it's been checked.
No, often the mum can be an external mum. There's a story in the Gemora about that with the Romans. You can have external damage and mum, 3 fingers or a hoof or something. Could be. There are internal mummin as well. We spoke about that in Shchita. But not in this case, we're talking about an external mum. Okay, so let's get back to the footnote. And since Ma'aser Sheni, this is now the square brackets at the bottom. And since Ma'aser Sheni is in this sense more stringent than the Todah and Shlomim offerings, we cannot automatically extend to them the prohibition against eating outside Jerusalem that is stated regarding the Ma'aser. For the same reason, we cannot extend this prohibition from Ma'aser Sheni to any of the other offerings that should be mentioned. In other words, your theory of Kal B'chomer, weak and more stringent, is not working. Because in fact, we're arguing to say it's the other way around. That the Meiser is more strict. And that's why it's forbidden in Jerusalem, outside of Jerusalem. Whereas all the other items, like the Bikurim, the first fruits, or like the Todah and the Shlomim, like the Thanksgiving, they're more lenient. And that's why you need a specific verse to tell you about them, because you wouldn't learn them automatically out of the case of the Meiser. Let's get to the next case. We had another case of the Bechor, the firstborn, and we said that the firstborn is more strict than the Todah and the Shlomim. In other words, we said like this: just like the Todah and the offering, the Todah and the Shlomim, if I'm not mistaken, we said has to wait until you sprinkle the blood. I'll just pull that up 1 second. Yeah, for sprinkling. So just like Todah and Shlomim, you have to wait until the blood's sprinkled. That's the rule about Todah and Shlomim. You're going to offer up. You got to. When it comes to Todah and Shlomim, you got to wait until the blood is sprinkled on the mizbeach, on the altar, before you eat of it. So just like the Todah and the Shlomim have to wait until you sprinkle the blood, so too with the Bechor, the firstborn, you also have to wait until you sprinkle the blood on the mizbeach. That's the learning. So Gemora says, "Umay chumra." Where's the stringency here of the Bechor? So he says, "Shekain kedushasoi meirechen." When did the Bechor become holy? When does the Bechor? We discussed this last week when it comes to a father having multiple firstborns. It can happen. A father who's married twice, and both wives gave birth to natural births of a son, who, by the way, are not Leviim or Kohanim, because they don't need the pidyon abed. So if both wives gave birth naturally, and the opening of the womb was these two sons, then the father will have two firstborn, two Bechors, one for one mother and one from another mother. What I don't know, by the way, is who gets the double portion of inheritance. Because Torah says that by default, the firstborn will get a double portion. He has two firstborn.
Isn't that-
The father or the mother's line?
Isn't
Because the father's line, you can only have one person.
Because the first child. Oh, yeah, you're right. So for inheritance, yeah, good point. So for inheritance,
it's like
chances are you're going to follow the father's line.
it's like Yaakov, and he had firstborns from four
Yeah.
different wives.
Yeah, and
And
Reuben was considered the firstborn.
Yeah.
Okay, good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, that's the argument of Yosef, that Yosef was taking over because of Rachel. So because Rachel took over Leah, so Yosef versus Reuben, there was a rival between Yosef and Reuben, who was considered the firstborn. Reuben said, I'm from Leah, but Yosef said, I'm from Rachel. Rachel's the beloved wife. So therefore, Yosef should be the firstborn. Okay, that was a point of conflict there. Okay, good point. So now we're talking about, so why is the Bechor more holy? The Bechor is more holy because when does the Kedusha start? The Kedusha starts from the moment of birth. That shows the holiness. The fact that the animal's born at the moment, that the animal is holy at the moment of birth. Okay? Whereas the Todah and the Shlomim, when does a sacrifice become holy? The Todah and the Shlomim, which is a Thanksgiving offering, when does that become holy? The moment you decide to dedicate it. So one animal starts off mundane, and then you come along and you say, now it's considered holy, kadosh, and I'm going to offer it up to Hashem as a sacrifice. Okay? So what does that show you? That the Bechor is more strict because the Bechor is holy straight out. So what do? Same response. Adarabba. Adarabba means on the contrary. It's a good word to know, by the way, Adarabba. It means it's like if you're arguing with someone, and he gives you a logical claim, and you believe that his logic is actually in your favor, you say Adarabah. On the contrary, it's a very nice argument, but it actually turns things completely around. So if you're looking for stringencies, let's talk about stringencies. Adarabah, Toida and Shlomim, the Thanksgiving offerings, Chamurim, are more strict than the Bechor. Why is that? Shekain Tu'unim Smicha, Unesachim, Utunufas Chaze Veshoik. There's something that the Toida and the Shlomim need that the Bechor doesn't have. What does it need? It needs Smicha. What does Smicha mean? It's linked to Smicha, right? It's the placing of the Kohanim's hands on the sacrifice as part of a ritual. Putting his hands on the sacrifice to show the sacredness and the holiness of the sacrifice. So that the A needs that. Then it needs the waving. Once you have the breast and the thigh, after you've slaughtered this animal and you've extracted these limbs, it goes through a process of waving, whatever that means. It's a spiritual ritual that takes place in the Beis Hamikdash, and you have to shake it. What does it show you? It shows you that the Toida and the Shlomim that have to go through all these rituals are more strict than the firstborn that doesn't have any of these rituals. Look at footnote 10. Before a Toida or Shlomim is slaughtered, its owner is commanded to place his hands on its head and lead. So it's not the Kohanim, it's the owners, and lead down with all his strength. This is stated explicitly regarding the Shlomim. And the Toida is a form of Shlomim, okay, same category. As the owner leans on one of these sacrifices, he recites words of praise to Hashem. Also, the Todah and the Shlomim must be accompanied by a prescribed amount of wine that is poured on the altar as libation. Oh, we skipped that one. Nesachim. What does the Nesachim mean? There's going to be pouring of wine as part of the ritual. Also, in another case, the breast and the right hind thigh of the Todah and Shlomim are removed along with the sacrificial parts and held by the Kohen and owner together. They then wave these parts in all four directions and also up and down. Yeah, it is like that. It's linked to that, by the way. Yeah. The commentaries point out that the whole waving process, in fact, it says there that by waving these animals, as well as waving the Lulav Etrog, they're pushing away the negative vibes from the community. That's the ritual that takes place in the Beis Hamikdash. For the next paragraph, none of these procedures is required for the Bechor. Okay, so therefore it's more stringent. Thus, we cannot accept Rishima's argument that a prohibition stated regarding the Todah and Shlomim extends automatically to the Bechor. You can't do that because the Bechor is lenient. Similarly, we cannot accept. The Bechor is more lenient. Similarly, we cannot accept the subsequent arguments that such a prohibition extends to the Chatas and the Asham, since these require only leaning but not libations or waving, or to the Olas, it requires only leaning and libations but not waving. In other words, the Bechor is the most strict of them all. The Todah and the Shlomim are the most strict of them all, and you can't extend them. We're going to discuss it now in the next categories.
The Todah that's a voluntary kind of offering.
Yeah.
So you put in these extra rituals, I suppose there's additional Thanksgiving.
Yeah, as part of the ceremony. Remember, Bechor wasn't very ceremonious, the firstborn. Excuse me. It was a need, a necessity to dedicate the firstborn animal, and you gave it to the Kohen as part of that dedication. But it didn't come with the whole pomp and ceremony that the Todah and the Shlomim would come with, which was a person wanting to show thanksgiving to Hashem, and that came with a whole ceremony linked to it. Well, the question is like this. I think the Shlomim, we discussed this last time. The Todah, if you went through certain things, like we said, today we don't have a Todah offering, we have a Hagoimon instead, the Bracha of Hagoimon. You go through, travel through the oceans, or through the deserts, right? Or you're in captivity, in prison, or you're going through health, to the point of death, right? you are obligated to bring the Torah offering. It would be obligatory. I think the Shlomim is more voluntary. What do you find there?
No, I'm just they pointing to the actual verses in Leviticus where these
The
two
Shlomim
kinds of
discussed.
offerings are discussed.
Let's do some research a little bit. Leviticus chapter 3 and chapter 8.
Chapter 7.
For which one?
Oh no, sorry, it says Shlamim 7:11.
Go back one. The Torah is 7:11, and the Torah is a form of Shlomim. Go back one. Regarding the Shlomim, which is Leviticus chapter 3 and chapter 8. All right.
3 verse 2, verse
Yeah,
8.
3 verse 2. Sorry, you're after verses 2, 8, and 13. Okay, says it here. Let's pull this up. Leviticus chapter 3. Yeah. And verse 2. Okay. Verse 2. If your offering is a sacrifice of well-being, we need some Rashi here. 1 second here.
It's amazing what you get on the phone.
Yeah.
You don't need books anymore. You just get it straight from here. Okay, Rashi said like this.
Get a big spot in it. Using a book on my phone.
What?
A big spot in your house. You build with a book on my phone.
No, I thought there was a spot in the corner there.
Books.
Yeah,
Newspaper.
yeah, Shlomim. By the way, one of the reasons they're called Shlomim is because they bring peace into the world. Number one. Number two is because they share the sacrifice partially on the Mizbeach, partially for the priests, and partially for the owners. It doesn't say exactly what the reason for it is, why you bring it. Yeah. I didn't quote exactly the reason of why you offer it up. I'll have to come back to that again. Yeah, okay, no, I'm not sure. The specific, let's go to 2 once again. Oh, what was that? 7. That speaks about the Torah offering. Right. Let's do 7. 7. Okay, verse 11 and 12. Okay?
Yeah.
Torah Zevach HaShlomim. Part of the Shlomim is called the Torah. Let's see Rashi.
It says
Hoidah al Hanes. So this is now for the miracles of crossing the sea, going through the desert, that they have to thank Hashem. What I understand from here is that the Shlomim is a voluntary korban. Anytime you want to thank Hashem or show gratitude is Shlomim. And the Torah is a specification or a subcategory of it, specifically for these 4 categories. And therefore, it won't always be voluntary. The Torah would be obligatory. If you had one of these experiences, you'd bring the Torah offering.
So it's more accurate to say that depending on the type of shlamim, it's
Of whether it's obligatory or not. Yeah, exactly. Okay, we go to the next category. Or the next paragraph. Last paragraph in the right-hand column. Last week we said the question that the chatas and the asham, which are 2 types of sin offerings, are more stringent than the bechor. So why is that? He says, "Shekain kodshe kadoshim," because the sacrifices of the sin offering are considered kodshe kadoshim, which means the holiest type of sacrifices. Whereas the bechor is called kodshim kalim, the weaker type. He's going to explain now in footnote 11. Let's see. Kodshe kadoshim, most holy sacrifices, offerings, are stringent in as much as they must be slaughtered in the northern part of the temple courtyard. And their meat may be eaten only by male kohanim.
What's that male? I mean, it's given.
Why? Often they would bring it home to their wives and daughters. You're saying because the daughters are not there. Is that what you're saying? Because they're not part of the ritual. But they would bring it home. And the question is, can the family members eat of them? So here we're saying that the kodshe kadoshim, the holiest type, cannot be eaten by the women.
It's just like Kohanim. We should
Yeah.
get a female Kohen.
Oh no, but there is a concept of women. For example, Truma. Truma was the produce that you dedicated from your field to the Kohanim. Truma can be eaten by the women of the family. Oh, so you're saying what? Yeah, but he was saying male because we're excluding the females. Yes, the women would be called Kohanim. They're part of the
members of the household of the Kohen. If he has any slaves or anything,
Also considered.
you may be able to use some of the things to feed.
I'm not sure of Kosher Gadoshim.
No,
but possibly, yeah.
You to refer to modern time.
Yeah, true.
When what?
No, because today.
Kohanim way review,
Kohanim
way review them now.
considered
Amen.
male.
Amen, yeah, sure.
So was this before kashrut was sort of?
It's the same time. With the kashrut. Remember, these are now
So what
new
they do
foods.
is They trade it or something, because the thigh is not kosher.
Which one?
A hind thigh is not kosher.
The back thigh because of the Gid Hanashe.
Yeah.
Where's the hind thigh? The shock. The
Right,
shock.
right,
Is the whole hind thigh not kosher, or is just the sinew that runs through the hind thigh? That's
I'm saying today it's not kosher.
yeah, because we don't know how to extract the sinew.
Yeah,
If you knew how to extract the sinew, you'd be able to eat the hind thigh.
trading it, so.
What's it called? That yeah. So I think in those days they knew.
Okay.
So it would exclude the sinew that was prohibited.
Okay.
Yeah. Trading, that's a good word, okay? Something new with it. Right, let's go to the next category. I'm still in the footnote. How do you know what trading is?
Have butchers or family.
Oh yeah, we know that, right? Okay, yeah. Okay, Koche Gadoshim. On the other hand, there's something called Koche Kalim, Kodoshim Kalim, and this is lesser holiness. They may be slaughtered anywhere in the courtyard. And their meat may be eaten by any Tahor person, except for the Kohen's portion of the breast and the right hind thigh, which may be eaten only by the Kohen in his household. So therefore, what are we saying? We're saying that the Chatas and the Asham, the sin offering, is the Koche Kadoshim, the holiest type of meat. But a Bechor offering is Koche Kalim, is a weaker type, and therefore can be eaten by others. He makes an exception here. He says a Bechor offering, which is Koche Kalim, it's a lighter type, may be eaten only by a Kohen in his household, since all its meat is the Kohen's portion. So he's giving an exception to the rule. He's saying that the firstborn may be a lighter type of holiness, but still the Kohen alone and his family. So that's an exception to the rule. At any rate, the Bechor is less stringent than the Chatas, as it may be slaughtered anywhere in the courtyard. That's a major difference. And may be eaten even by the females of the Kohen's household. So the Bechor, right? So the Bechor can be eaten even by the females, which means you do extend it a bit wider. Whereas a sin offering was specifically the male Kohanim, as we discussed, which shows you at the Chatas and the Asham, the sin offerings are more strict than the Bechor offering. But now comes the Gemara and says, hold on, you only see it in one way. Let me show you something else. Adrab, on the contrary. Bechor, Chamor, the firstborn is more strict. Over the page to 17b2. Why is the firstborn more strict? And this we already established the logic earlier. Shekain Kudushase Merechem, because it comes first because it's holy from the womb. So therefore, the firstborn is a more strict type of korban because it becomes holy from the womb. Whereas the sin offering only comes in at a later point. And therefore, we can't compare one to another. Okay, next case. Umay Chumra, the Oila Mechatas V'asham. Okay, so we said that the Oila offering, another type of offering, do we have clarification what that's brought for? We mentioned last time, if I'm not mistaken, what the Oila was for. Give me a second here. Nedarecha, right, your vows. Vows are extracurricular, extra generous contributions. You decide that you want to donate 100 rand to tzedakah. In those days, they decided, I'm going to offer up a cow on the korban. That was the concept of a neder, an oath. That's called the oila offering. It's offered up. So now we're comparing the oila to the chatas and the asham. What is the stringency of the oila they're right in comparison to the chatas and the asham to the sin offering. And the answer is quite clear. Shekain kolil. The oil offering is offered up entirely on the mizbech. You burn the whole thing. That's a stringency. If someone offered up a neder, nobody gets a portion of this, which makes sense. Why would the kohen have to get a portion of yours? If you dedicated this to Hashem, then it gets burnt up to Hashem. It's not a sacrifice that the kohen has to benefit from. Shekain kolel, because it's burnt entirely, whereas the chatas and the asham isn't, and part of it is given to the kohen. So that's the reason for the stringency of the oila. Says the Gemora, Adarab, on the contrary, chatas v'asham chamire. The chatas and the sin offering, they're more strict. Why? Shekain mechapre, because they atone for sin. You can't belittle a sacrifice that atones for sin. If a korban is strong enough to atone for a sin, it shows you how stringent it is. Whereas the neder, or the voluntary contribution, that does nothing. So therefore, why? It does nothing. So therefore, it's not stricter. If you look at footnote 13, he's going to unpack these various sacrifices. Let's go through this. He says the chatas is required as an atonement for the unwitting transgression of any prohibition whose intentional violation is punishable by kores. But this was unwitting. He didn't intend it. Had he done it intentionally, it would have been kores. But because it was unwitting, it wasn't intentional, therefore it comes as the chatas. The asham is required as an atonement for the possible transgression of such a prohibition as well as for certain other prohibitions. Let's give the records. The oila, however, is primarily a voluntary offering. And although we are taught that one who offers an oila receives atonement for certain undemeanors, so you still have that as an atonement, the Torah never obligates a person to bring an oila on account of a specific sin. Rather, it assures the person who offers it voluntarily and the merit of his pleasing God. In this manner, his misdemeanor will be forgiven. Interesting. So he's saying that the oila offering does bring to atonement. But not the same way as the chatas and the asham offering would be into atonement. He finishes off this piece and he says, Rava has thus presented a counter-argument to every one of Rav Shimon's assumptions, demonstrating if the Torah had mentioned any one of the items, we would not have been able to extend its prohibition to others, since each one is in some case more stringent than its counterparts. Accordingly, the entire list is necessary in its own context. That is, to teach the explicit prohibition against eating outside Jerusalem. And no part of it is available for any other exposition. So in other words, you need the entire verse with all the details of the firstborn and of the oila offering and of the chatas offering. And each item has to be there to teach us the rule about the walls of Yerushalayim, because you can't start comparing sacrifice to sacrifice because one is more stringent than the other. Which this is a typical Jewish cop, because the whole week last week we argued why you don't need the verses, because logic will tell you that you compare it to the others. We broke our heads to try and figure out how are we comparing A to B or A to C. Now comes along the Gemora and says, you can't compare anything. And this explains why you need the verses of the puzzle. That's created a bit of confusion. Okay, one final point here. He brings the case, but if you look at footnote 14, explains what he's coming to do. Although Rav already refuted each link in Rav Shimon's chain of reasoning, he adds a general reason why the oil cannot be derived from any of the sacrifices mentioned above. Because this is like a general rule, and oil you can't learn from anything. So this is back into the Gemara. Left-hand column, bottom paragraph. V'chulhu chamire ma'oila. And they're all more strict than the oila. That means the chatas, the asham, the bechor. That's the sin offerings and the firstborn. Toida and shlomim, the thanksgiving offerings. They're more strict than the oila. And therefore you can't learn from the oila. Other way around. Let's see. The isbo shtei achilos. There's two consumptions. A, the altar consumes, and B, the kohanim eat. Whereas in the oila offering, it's totally consumed by the altar. And therefore, We cannot extend to the oila a stringency mentioned in any of the other contexts. Okay, this does get a little bit complicated because what did we say earlier? That the oila is more strict because you offer it up entirely on the mizbeach and nobody gets to eat of it. Now we're saying that the oila is more weak because it doesn't have two consumptions, it has only one consumption. Footnote discusses that. I'm not going to go into footnote now. It'll be too difficult for us to get involved in this now. We'll just end this piece here. Let's go on. Let's go on to the next column. Okay. Okay. What do we say? Last week's Gemora ended off with a strange Gemora. I just explained that, right? Praise is the mother of Reb Shimon. If you don't give birth to Reb Shimon, rather don't give birth. Remember that line?
Yes.
In other words, aim for big. If you don't go big, don't aim at all. Walk. So let's discuss this. So now, why would you want your child to be like Reb Shimon? Reb Shimon made a massive mistake. Reb Shimon is the one who told us that we can learn each one from one another, each sacrifice to each other. You can learn, and therefore you take the verses and apply them elsewhere. And now you're telling me it's all wrong. You can't compare the sacrifices to each other. So why are you praising the mother of Reb Shimon? He may have been a holy Jew, but why are we praising the mother and saying you should have children like him? Says the Gemara, the way he holds, in other words, we don't agree with his thinking, but the way he holds, what does he hold? In the Art Scroll, he summarizes this. His own line of reasoning. How do you see someone's a genius? Someone can be seen as a genius not just by telling you the truth or the emes. I don't mean emes in terms of lying, getting it right. Right? You don't just see someone who's a genius because what he's saying is right. You can see someone's a genius even when they're wrong. If their logic is so systematic and so thought through, they may be wrong. But wow, this guy thinks cleverly. That's what we're saying. It's the way Reb Shimon thought is so clever. He may be wrong, and his comparisons of one sacrifice to the next sacrifice may be wrong. But the systematic approach that he took is what impressed Rafa. That's what we explained over here. According to what he holds, and he summarizes it, where he says that the Oila was more strict than the Chatas and the Asham, which in turn are more strict than the Bechor, which is in turn more strict than the Todah and the Shlomim, which is in turn more strict than the Ma'aseh Sheni. So you see how he's dependent, each sacrifice on one another. Mesoris lei likra v'darish lei. The way he managed to invert the verses and expound in different orders from one verse to another, proving his point, that's the genius of Reb Shimon. It may be wrong, but it's still a genius. Okay, so I think that's the reason, and therefore we're saying halavai. Someone, the hope is that a person should have a child like Reb Shimon. We can go on a little bit more. Let's go to the next case. One thing I want to say is that it seems like while I was looking through the next coming pages, although we're so close to the end, close but not close. Yeah, a lot of the sections here are discussing now sacrifices. Remember this topic of Makkos and lashes, sort of gets very diverted along the way. The Mishnah that we learned originally in this chapter is the opening line of the chapter was talking about bikurim, eating bikurim without reciting the declaration. Remember that's how we started discussing this. And so we're on a tangent now about bikurim, and then we're on a tangent now about other sacrifices that are linked to bikurim. That's how we got onto this. I'm actually going to wrap it up here because I do have to go on to another function. Seems to be my typical Wednesday night story. So we're going to end it here at 7b2, last paragraph on the right hand column. With that, we're going to